Every traveler who packs up their entire existence, says goodbye to the familiar streets of their hometown, and boards a one-way flight to the Philippine archipelago prepares themselves for the visible shifts. You mentally brace yourself for the thick, tropical humidity that wraps around you like a warm blanket the second you step out of the terminal. You anticipate the chaotic, neon-lit choreography of the city streets, where jeepneys, tricycles, and modern SUVs navigate a complex gridlock in a rhythm that seems entirely impossible to an untrained Western eye. You prepare for a shift in the concept of time itself, moving away from the hyper-accelerated, clock-bound urgency of Western corporate life, and stepping into the patient, fluid, and communal pace of the islands. But beneath these obvious cultural transformations lies a silent psychological side effect that almost no one warns you about. It is a slow, neurological rewrite that doesn't begin in your mind, but rather on your tongue, quietly re-engineering your relationship with biology, memory, and flavor. It typically happens after you have crossed the one-year mark of living in the Philippines. The initial tourist novelty has worn off, replaced by the comfortable, deeply grounding rhythms of daily life in the provinces or a local barangay. You decide it is time to fly back home to visit family in the United States, Canada, or the United Kingdom. You step back into a pristine, ultra-modern Western supermarket. The floors are polished to a mirror shine. The fluorescent lights hum with clinical efficiency, and the aisles stretch out in perfect geometric precision. You walk up to a shelf or order a meal you used to absolutely love before you left, perhaps a classic American bacon cheeseburger, a heavily marketed corporate pizza, or a childhood comfort food from a popular restaurant chain. You take that very first bite, fully expecting a wave of nostalgic comfort. But instead, something inside your brain feels completely broken. The food tastes flat. It feels strangely sterile, uniform, and hollow, lacking any structural depth or emotional soul. It tastes like it was engineered in a sterile corporate laboratory by a team of food scientists maximizing profit margins, rather than cooked in a kitchen by a human being who cares about the ingredients. Suddenly, a terrifying, irreversible realization hits you. The Philippines didn't just change your geographic location or your lifestyle. It permanently rewired your human palate on a cellular level. And the massive, multi-billion-dollar corporate food system you left behind back home? It suddenly tastes incredibly lonely, synthetic, and dead inside. For decades, global food critics, mainstream Western media, and elitist culinary institutions have repeated a remarkably lazy, surface-level narrative about Southeast Asian cuisine, specifically Filipino food. They look through a narrow, highly biased Western lens, evaluating the food of the islands by the rigid, archaic metrics of French classical reduction sauces or minimalist European plating. Because they do not see tiny, mathematically arranged portions on a plate, they falsely label the cuisine as too heavy, too sweet, or fundamentally one-dimensional. But this lazy critique completely ignores thousands of years of brilliant culinary history, complex island geography, and deeply intuitive ancestral food science. Today, we are looking far past the fast food counters, the commercialized tourist traps, and the superficial travel vlogs. We are going deep into the emerald heart of the Philippine food philosophy, to uncover why modern Western corporate food feels completely dead inside once you have experienced the real, beating heart of traditional Filipino cooking. Every traveler who packs up their entire existence, says goodbye to the familiar streets of their hometown, and boards a one-way flight to the Philippine archipelago prepares themselves for the visible shifts. You mentally brace yourself for the thick, tropical humidity that wraps around you like a warm blanket the second you step out of the terminal. You anticipate the chaotic, neon-lit choreography of the city streets, where jeepneys, tricycles, and modern SUVs navigate a complex gridlock in a rhythm that seems entirely impossible to an untrained Western eye. You prepare for a shift in the concept of time itself, moving away from the hyper-accelerated, clock-bound urgency of Western corporate life, and stepping into the patient, fluid, and communal pace of the islands. But beneath these obvious cultural transformations lies a silent psychological side effect that almost no one warns you about. It is a slow, neurological rewrite that doesn't begin in your mind, but rather on your tongue, quietly re-engineering your relationship with biology, memory, and flavor. To truly understand why a Westerner's palate undergoes such a radical, permanent transformation after a year in the Philippines, we must first turn our lens backward and critically examine the hidden reality of the modern Western diet. In major Western nations, consumers live under the absolute, unchallenged illusion of total food abundance. You can walk into a mega grocery store in the freezing sub-zero dead of winter and buy a box of bright red strawberries, a perfectly green bunch of asparagus, or soft, ripe avocados. On the surface, it looks like an absolute triumph of human progress, technology, and global supply chain logistics. But this artificial convenience comes at a devastating, hidden cost to human flavor, seasonal nutrition, and basic biological satisfaction. Because the modern Western food supply chain is entirely commercialized and controlled by a handful of massive conglomerates, food is grown, harvested, and distributed exclusively for shelf life, uniform appearance, and transport durability, never for actual flavor or life force. Consider the journey of a standard supermarket tomato in the West. It is picked while it is completely green, hard as a rock, and entirely devoid of natural vine-ripened sugars or complex organic acids. It is then loaded into massive, climate-controlled shipping containers, where it is artificially sprayed with ethylene gas to trigger a chemical color change, turning it bright red just before it is placed on the display shelf. It looks visually perfect to the eye, smooth, round, and unblemished, but when you bite into it, it tastes like wet cardboard because the natural sugars, esters, and volatile flavor compounds never had the biological opportunity to develop under the sun. Fruits, vegetables, and meats are systematically bred to look completely uniform and wax-polished, completely stripping away their natural heirloom nutrients, complex bitter compounds, and authentic flavors in the process. To compensate for this systematic loss of natural flavor caused by industrial farming, major Western food corporations rely on a simple, highly addictive, and deeply toxic chemical formula, overloading every single product on the shelf with hyper-processed corn sugars, industrial seed oils, and massive amounts of hidden sodium. From pasta sauces to commercial sliced bread, everything is injected with high-fructose corn syrup to trick the human brain into experiencing a synthetic dopamine hit. This corporate architecture breeds a deeply isolated, transactional relationship with the very fuel that keeps us alive. In the West, food has ceased to be an art form, a seasonal celebration, or a cultural anchor. It has become a fast transaction, a sterile fuel to be consumed as quickly as possible, often alone, in front of a digital screen, or behind the wheel of a car rushing through a drive-thru. It is hyper-processed, hyper-sanitized, and ultimately emotionally empty. And that is exactly why landing in the Philippines and eating locally for a year feels like a massive, shocking biological awakening to the human nervous system. When a Westerner first steps inside a local Philippine public market, known traditionally as a palengke, the experience is an absolute shock to the senses. For someone accustomed to the quiet, sanitized, plastic-wrapped aisles of a Western supermarket, the palengke can feel incredibly overwhelming, chaotic, and loud. There are no plastic clamshell boxes hiding the food from the open air. There are no automated artificial mists spraying down produce to give a fake illusion of freshness. Instead, you are greeted by an unvarnished, hyper-local reality that is intensely, unapologetically alive. The fish resting on the counter aren't sitting on a styrofoam tray under chemical preservatives. Their eyes are crystal clear because they were swimming in the local sea just hours before dawn, brought in by local fishermen who understand the precise movement of the tides. The vegetables aren't perfectly uniform or genetically modified to look like plastic models. They are vibrant, uniquely shaped, and still carry the rich, earthy scent of the local province's volcanic soil. This environment brings us directly to the core psychological and biological engineering of the traditional Filipino palate. The brilliant, historically vindicated science of natural souring and hyperlocality. In a hot, humid, tropical island environment, heavy dairy creams, thick animal fats, and rich European-style reduction sauces completely fail to refresh the human body. If you eat a heavy, butter-laden Western sauce in 35-degree tropical humidity, your digestive system slows down, your energy levels crash, and your body feels physically weighed down by the density of the meal. Ancestral Filipino cooking solved the challenge of tropical heat not through heavy fats, but through the brilliant, intuitive application of acidity, fermentation, and fresh balance.